first meeting of the Place Scrutiny Committee. My name's Hazel Eilert. I'm the Scrutiny Manager, and I'm attended today by my colleague Robert McGowan, who's Policy and Scrutiny Officer. And today we have some members in the chamber and some members attending remotely. So we'll move on to the first item on the agenda, which is to note the appointment of the chair as Lisa Dimmock. Lisa, would you like to say a few words of welcome?
Yes, thank you, Hazel. It's lovely to be back in Scrutiny Committee. So my name's Lisa Dimmock and I'm County Councillor for Portskewett Ward in the south of the county. I'd like to welcome returning councillors as well as new councillors. The Place Scrutiny Committee is a new committee, so I'm really excited to see what we're going to scrutinise over the next year, 2 years. And I look forward to working with you all. So now we'll move on to item 2, appointment of vice chair, and I would like to nominate Louise Brown. So I'm looking for a seconder for that, please.
Could I just say thank you for the privilege, but I think I'd rather somebody else took that position because I've got quite a few other things on, other committees I'm involved in. Thank you.
Okay. Would anyone else like to make a recommendation or nominate anyone?
Can I nominate Councillor Sue McConnell?
Of course. Have you got someone to second that?
Yeah, I'd happily second that.
Thank you, Ben.
Chair, I'll happily nominate myself if you wish.
Okay, thank you, Jane. Thomas, would you be happy to second Jane?
Gladly, Chair.
Okay. Are we able to put a vote in the box?
I think we'll do it as a show of hands, if that's okay.
Yes,
so we've got 2 potential candidates. We've got Sue McConnell. How many in favour, please? 1, 2, 3. So is that 3? We've got Ben, Jackie and Sue. Any others? No, okay. And then we've got Jane. Could we just do it by a show of hands? So we have Jane, 1, 2, 3, 4. So I think that's carried that the vice chair will be Jane. Okay, welcome. And if we could proceed with the rest of the agenda, Chair.
Lovely, thank you. Have we had any apologies for absence?
No, we haven't, Chair.
Okay. And declarations of interest, we'll do those as and when, but just to note, I will declare an interest on the petition that's being presented later on, because I was the cabinet member for Mon Life and I did meet with Friends of Castle Meadows. So public open forum, I don't think I can see anyone joining from the public, is that correct, Hazel?
Yes, that's correct, Chair.
Lovely, and we'll move to item 6, discussion on the committee's forward work programme. So we do need to think about the things that we want to scrutinise. So Hazel, do you want to just come in here?
Yes, Chair, just bear with me. You'll see that I've placed a report on the agenda today, which I'm taking to all of the scrutiny committees, which outlines how you set a work programme. So just to give you a brief overview, setting the work programme is an annual activity, but it's updated throughout the year. The work programme is the prerogative of the committee, so you decide what items are scrutinised. There are several sort of sources of information which will help you determine which topics you should scrutinise, and those are the Cabinet Forward Plan, also things like suggestions from members of the public, your own suggestions from other councillors, officers, and then you agree topics that you'd include into the work programme. For those of you that have attended the training, the key sort of things to think about about is to think about areas where you can add value, where you can actually contribute to the council's strategic direction. So suggestions would be the new local development plan and strategic documents that are ongoing and are going to be coming forward for a decision at some point. I don't intend to go through the report, Chair. I'm assuming that everybody's read it. I have included a little more detail than usual just to explain to new members, what committees we have in place and how those have arisen through the new legislation, Local Government Election in Wales Act. And I'll draw attention to the Scrutiny Chairs Group, which will be a meeting held frequently and they're diarised, where the Scrutiny Chairs will ensure that there isn't duplication between work streams of different scrutiny committees, and they will also meet with the Chair of Audit there to make sure that there's no duplication there. So under paragraph 4.2, you can see the different sources of potential topics. We've got corporate plan, corporate assessment, and then the performance and overview committee, they will be looking more specifically at things like the risk register and sort of budget reporting. You also now have a new responsibility to be the host of petitions to the committee by the public. So those will land with you in the first instance, and you can make recommendations to the cabinet member what you'd like to do with those and what action you expect the cabinet member to take. And we did talk briefly about scrutiny workshops in the training sessions. Those are sort of for items that are going to be discussed over a period of time, probably several months. It's significant sort of policy development work, and one of those examples is the new local development plan. And under section 5, we talk about prioritising topics for scrutiny, and you'll see that I've included a sort of flow diagram in the appendices that shows you how you should attempt to prioritise. If you've got like 20 topics that you want to scrutinise, work your way through the series of questions and ask yourselves, where can we actually add the most value? And our advice would be to focus on fewer items in more detail, because you've got sort of 6 meetings diarised, but you can have additional meetings, but that's how you can add the maximum value. So I brought this today, Chair, so that we could have a brief discussion, but I'm not expecting you to set out necessarily your work plan for the entire year, because without a detailed cabinet forward plan and knowing the direction of the new administration, it's difficult to do. But some thoughts from you, some starters for 10, and to give you a bit more of an understanding really about how your work programme is set and who sets it. Hopefully this report will give you a flavour of that, Chair.
Lovely, thank you, Hazel. Obviously, I did email all members and say, think about the things that you want to look at. I did say to Hazel that I would like to look at the High Street closure in Chepstow. As someone that lives in the south of the county, the complaints are thick and fast. The traffic issues around Chepstow isn't just because of the High Street, I appreciate that, but it's not helping matters. So that's something that I'd like to look at. I'd like to open up to members. Is there anything that you would like to suggest or put forward?
We have Councillor Brown.
Sorry, we don't have a raised hand function.
It's coming now.
Oh, it's come now, is it? Oh, okay.
Chandler?
Sorry, shall I carry on, because I'm not in the speak now function? Do you want me to come in later, Chair?
If you come in after, so I've got Councillor Chandler, Councillor Callard and Councillor McConnell, and then I'll take you, Louise.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Right. Yeah, I would be interested. It doesn't feature in the Cabinet Forward Plan as far as I can see, but I think the key issue for the county as a whole, and for my ward in particular, is the issue of flooding. So I would quite like to have us looking at scrutinising what are the council's plans for both flood prevention and flood preparation for the future. I think it's strategically important for us, and I don't see it appearing anywhere else. So I'd like to put that in our forward planner.
Thank you. Councillor Callard?
Thanks, Chair, and I agree with Ian that flooding is going to be a hot topic for us in the county. But again, it's something that does affect my ward a bit. But I know there's the redevelopment of the Castle Meadows in Abergavenny is going to be happening soon. There are already proposals out for it. Some of it, I believe, has been granted planning, although Mark probably know a bit more of me about that, but I think it's something that this committee should have a focus on in the future.
Okay, thank you. Councillor McConnell?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, again, local, but I think probably relevant right across the county. So locally in Abergavenny, very much attached to my ward, is the building of the new school. That's gone through planning and is this sort of project, and the planning for which is complete, except that two things I'd be interested in. One is the way in which the active travel arrangements are made towards the school and how that's progressed, because I think that's not quite decided yet. It sounds a bit vague at the moment. And then connected to that, the ongoing issue of how that is used, so how we promote the use of the active travel routes to the school and in general, I think, in the county, so we can put roads in or put paths in, but it's how they're used and how we encourage people into swapping to cycling and walking. And also connected to that, and this all does form a sort of piece. The school is designed to become quite a community hub, but again, it's a question of whether it is actually used as such and how that's communicated. So that's something we should be looking at going forward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Officer Mark Hand, did you want to come in here?
Thanks, Chair. I'm happy to wait until the end of members' ideas if you want. There's quite a few sort of relevant to my portfolio that I thought I might be able to add a couple of helpful points on. But if I wait till the end of the list and come in then, if that's okay.
Okay, that's absolutely fine. So, Councillor Brown?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I very much support the High Street Chepstow survey about whether or not the High Street should be reopened, because I think that very much, our scrutiny officer Hazel was talking about the public interest test, and that has certainly got a very high public interest in the local area. And then secondly, really a topic I think that's traditionally come within economy and development, and obviously now place scrutiny is dealing with that area of work, would be the revised local development plan, because I think that naturally sits with this particular committee and has done in the past. And so obviously we may get more of a steer from officers as to which topics come within this committee and which topics come outside of it. But I think those two do actually come within this particular committee, and obviously regeneration of high streets and so forth. I think that's a natural area for the Place Scrutiny Committee. But it'd be interesting to hear from officers as about the suggestions and which areas of obviously now we've got a change in committees, because previously we had Children and Young People Committee and Adults Scrutiny Committee. That's now become the People Committee, and we've got Place Scrutiny committee, which I understand replaces economy and development. So it'd be interesting to look at the borderlines between the particular committees and sort of some clarity with regard to that, particularly as we've got a new scrutiny committee structure during this administration, which means that existing councillors and possibly new councillors can get a bit lost as to where the borderlines are between which naturally goes into which committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Councillor Strong?
Hi, thank you. I just want to back up Councillor Chandler's point about flooding. I mean, it's a sort of whole county issue, really. And obviously in County Cork, we've got the Neddon, we've got issues around the castle, and obviously the Severn, and sort of looking to, potential issues with the outfall to the Severn as well. So if we could look at that, I'd be really I think that would be really helpful.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Strong. Councillor Bryn?
Sorry, I had difficulty putting my moved off. We're putting another town centre into.
Bryn, we can't actually see you. We can see a clock.
Oh,
there we go. Now
can
we
you
can.
Can you see me now? Sorry, bit short. Yeah, I wonder if I could put another town centre into the mix, if that's possible, with Mono Street. I know it's part of the levelling up bid coming up, but I don't think any clear decisions have been made at how that should look and how we can address active travel within Mono Street in Monmouth. So if we could put that in and have a good look at that, that would be helpful, I think.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Davis.
Thanks, Chair. I'd like to propose that this committee considers looking at what more can this county do in the context of its approach to placemaking to encourage and leverage the immense civic capital that we have as a county, and particularly to create spaces for that cultural, that civic energy and capital to be leveraged to the benefit of the wider county and its population.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Chandler, did you want to come back in?
Yes, I did. Thank you, Chair. Yes, I just there's a couple of other thoughts that I've got. Maybe because we don't know what the Cabinet's plans are with some of the working groups, and particularly the Strategic Transport Working Group and the Climate Emergency Working Groups. But I do think it's worth us just putting a marker down, depending on what they're proposing for those working groups, that we also have a look or reserve the right to be looking at some of the issues that might fall under that. Because I've got a particular interest in highways and transport and looking at sustainable travel as well as active travel around the county. And in terms of climate emergency, obviously that covers a huge amount of things. But I think there's a particular area to do with housing that I think falls within the remit of this area here. And I just think we need to look at how we're supporting home insulation, retrofits, housing, but also the rolling out of a affordable housing strategy for the county. So I don't know to what extent those would fall in here. And of course, that does depend a little bit on what work plan the Cabinet is going to come up with. But I think it's worth putting those down as markers that the Cabinet might be taking into account as it looks at its programme.
Okay, thank you. So that's all the members' recommendations. Mark, did you want to come in there?
Yeah, excuse me. Yeah, thanks, Chair. Loads of really good ideas there, most of which sit in my portfolio. So we'll be seeing a lot of each other over the coming months. But welcome all of those ideas. I guess just to touch on a couple of them, if that's appropriate. So replacement local development plan, a few of you have talked about. That featured really highly in the work programme of the sort of previous equivalent or roughly equivalent committee. So I suggest it absolutely sits in the Place Scrutiny Committee's portfolio. And there's loads of work coming up on that where we'd normally bring different bits into that group. In terms of flooding, this year we have to produce a new, I'm just reading the proper name of it, local flood risk management strategy. So that's something the team will be working on this year. So that might be a perfect way of aligning your desire to look at some of the flooding work with that piece. So as that plan develops, we could bring it through this committee if that's of interest to you. And you might also be interested in some kind of update on what we call Section 19 or flood investigation reports from the events in 2019, 2020 and 2021. There were several reports done. So if the committee were interested, we could bring sort of an update paper to you on what's happened with the actions arising from those, many of which sit outside of the council's controls. They sit with other bodies such as Welsh Water or Natural Resources Wales primarily. But we could bring the update report if that might be of interest.
Okay.
In terms of high streets, there's various processes those works are going through. But again, things like Mono Street, there's a sort of a well tag project going on that could report into this committee if you wanted. There's actually a meeting yesterday for Chepstow, what was called the placemaking plan is now going to be termed the Transforming Chepstow Master Plan, where the high street was discussed. So there'll be some updates or different work on that in coming weeks anyway that you'll be interested in. And we might want a separate conversation about whether you want that to come into scrutiny or not in terms of timescales. I think the only bit probably I'd question, sorry, another bit of work you mentioned about Abergavenny School in particular. There's a whole realm of work around active travel, which sits between Monlife and the Highways team that you'd probably be interested in as a committee. With the Abergavenny School in particular, there's links there with other work that the council's Highways team does on promoting non-car transport to school, so with school travel plans, cycling and push scooting and walking training. So that might be an interesting topic for you. And then the other one I was going to question slightly was around Castle Meadows and that active travel project, in that it is going through a well tag process for active travel, and then it's coming in as a planning application. So you might want to think as a scrutiny committee how you are distinct from the planning committee function and don't sort of double up or overlap on those functions. But hopefully that's helpful, Chair.
That's great. Thank you ever so much, Mark. Obviously, Hazel, that's given you a lot to think about with regards to our forward work programme. So are we happy for us to move on to the next item?
Chair, I'll take those back and formulate a draft work programme, and I'll liaise with Mark in terms of timescales, and we'll try and get some shape to this.
Yeah, and we can take it to the chairs meeting as well to make sure nothing overlaps.
Yeah.
So the next item, wait there, let me just get my massive pack. I could.
Sorry, Chair, I've got my hand up.
Oh, sorry, Ian, did you want to come back in?
Yeah, I just wanted to, because obviously we don't want to duplicate stuff. It was where I think that the local issues in Chepstow and Abergavenny, etc., are very important. Are they also being covered by the relevant area committees? And what's the relationship between those area committees and the other parts of the council? Would be good to have a bit of clarification on that.
Okay. I know Savonside is not really in place at the moment. Mark, are you able to help with regards to Ian's question with the area committees and the work that they're doing, or if they're still doing?
Unfortunately not, Chair. I'm unclear what the plan is with those committees, but I've had several people ask if they're going to be resumed.
Okay, we'll have to come back to you on that, Ian. Is that okay? Okay. So the next item is item 7, and that's the pre-decision scrutiny for the Wye Valley Villages future plan. I understand Roger's presenting this report, or are you now presenting it, Mark?
I think Roger's appeared in the room, so
oh, there he is.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hiya. Good morning, members. Apologies for arriving a little bit late. My IT of all days decided to not work properly, so I've made my way down to ask. But yeah, grateful for the opportunity to present this report. I'm sure you'll be hearing about the importance of having plans, both in the context of setting a holistic future for towns and communities, but also in the context of being able to gain funding from various funding bodies. Welsh Government have made it, are making it clearer that having a plan, or a town plan or community plan, or a plan in development is very helpful when we come to seeking funding, should we do so at some point in the future. And many of the projects which we have done and quite likely will be doing in the future will rely upon funding from other bodies. So that's a brief outline to why, in general terms, what the plan is intended to do. That being said, we've got plans for Chepstow, which Mark was just mentioned. That's in progress. There's a Caldicot plan, there's an Usk plan. You are likely to see plans being developed for the other towns in the coming years. This one was a little unusual in that there isn't a town as such. It's a group of communities within the Wye Valley AONB. And that made it different in how we went about it. Today, we're seeking support from the committee and comments from the committee, which hopefully, if indeed you do support the report to go forward, will be taken to Cabinet later in July. By doing so, we'll be seeking then formal approval or formal support for the plan. Then, having achieved that, we will be going to the community councils to ensure that they also formally support the plan. When I talk about the community councils and what made this a little bit unusual is this plan was prepared with 4 community councils. Devorden Community Council, St Albans Community Council, Tynton and Trellick United. So all 4 work together along with Wye Valley AONB and Monmouthshire County Council. That's different in how we've worked with community councils in the past, but maybe we'll set a direction for the future, we'll see. The background to why this report was prepared and the study was undertaken is there was consistent representation from community councils about road safety and other matters such as public transport came up and signage. There became common issues amongst those communities and community councils. And we decided to meet with them and ask whether or not they wish to work collectively to prepare a plan which covered the Wye Valley AONB area that sits within Monmouthshire. There was support for that, and the agenda for the first meeting was provided in your pack, so you can see the outline of the type of conversations we were having at that stage, and there was a terms of reference put together. And ultimately, we commissioned Arup Consultancy to draft the report, or do the work to prepare the report. In preparing the report, it included numerous meetings with the client group, so that was the community council representatives, Wye Valley AONB, Monmouthshire County Council representatives, officers and the like. There was also a meeting with stakeholder groups, and there was also a much broader consultation with the public about the contents of the plan and how people felt about what was in there. So the plan going forward includes, bear with me a sec. My IT continues to play me up. Anyway, the plan includes issues such as road safety, signage, public transport, active travel, employment, tourism. They're all referenced within the report. That being said, we never lost sight of the fact that one of the important issues and one of the issues which started this off was around road safety. So plans are in place and some have already been implemented to introduce reduced speeds in various villages within the Wye Valley ANB. So some villages are reducing to 20 miles per hour, and that program's underway at the moment, and I believe will continue through this financial year. We talked about signage, so as we could physically see that something was happening, something was different. And signage in discussions with the various community councils, new signage is to be introduced as gateways to the villages to emphasise the fact that they're coming into the village. And whilst there's consistent features around some aspects of the signage, there's also within the background unique features which will highlight that village. That work's been commissioned and the signs are probably not in production yet, but will be in the next week or so, and hopefully they'll be going up during the summer. There's also been a bid made by Wye Valley AONB to get funding to support extending the role of the village halls. Can they be used more extensively within the community? And practically, can we introduce things like energy-saving features within those village halls to make them a more attractive venue and a more used more frequently then within the community? So that's another piece of work which is presently underway. The priorities around the report are mentioned in the executive summary. I appreciate you may not have read the whole of the report from first page to last, but within the executive summary, it highlights some of the priorities which ultimately we would hope this plan and the delivery group will look upon and seek to develop. So ensuring safe and sustainable transport will be looking towards public transport, cycling, walking, more so than necessarily simply looking towards the private car. And that is, as I say, that's within the Wye Valley AONB. And as background, it works better working across an area than working with individual villages or community councils, because you are working, as I say, across what is recognised as a major tourist destination. Conserve and enhance the landscape is a balance between what the landscape should look like against how it would develop, but they're also looking at how agriculture might be changed within that area to provide a more sustainable agricultural product within that area. Now that's likely to be pilots. I know from my background the difficulty of dealing with agriculture and how that develops, but nevertheless, in terms of what it might look like in the future, that's part of the work of this group. Sustainable tourism, again, is about how do we create an offer for tourism which seeks to maintain the beauty and the uniqueness of the Wye Valley, but also seeks to maintain that tourism, that being an important part of the economy for the village, for the villages, yes, but for the Wye Valley more generally. And then it also talks about retaining the network of unique villages, which we've spoken about to some degree. But there is an example of a plan within the existing plan for what Lundogo, I think, is the one which they used as an example, what we might do in there to improve the facilities within the village and make it a more attractive place to be, without losing the uniqueness of the villages. So we could do more work along those lines, specifically with each village. And then there's talk about supporting the local economy, so that's going to be around tourism, employment generally. But it also gets into issues such as can we create co-working spaces within the valley so people don't have to travel so far? And that may take us back to the village halls. Could they be used more extensively with some investment and make that an attractive place for people to go to rather than commute to other larger cities? So it's offering opportunities there. And finally, provide joined-up governance. Well, that will be how we continue to take this report forward and the contents of the report and deliver it. And I emphasise that. We are doing quick wins. We're doing speed limits. We're doing signage. We are looking to invest into the village halls. But there would be a larger challenge, I think, in terms of taking forward the other recommendations within the report. And that will rely upon the representatives on the delivery group, which will be, as I mentioned, the community councils, county council and Wye Valley AMB, being able to sustain the effort to take the report forward and continue to make work with it. I'd have to say, if there's major capital demands, that's also going to be a challenge. Based upon what I'm aware of in terms of where funding may be coming available, at least from Welsh Government, then there's no obvious routes at the moment which would take us down this line. Nevertheless, having a plan in place, should funding become available, does put us in a better place to bid for any funding in the future. So far, most of the funding for the works undertaken, that's paying for the study and paying for the signage, has been provided through Wye Valley AONB. They are also the body making the bid for funding to support the development of the village halls. So that is proving an avenue which we can use to seek funding to take the report forward. So that is a description and summary of the background to the report. It is different to some of the others, which are much more focused, but nevertheless, we do think it's a good opportunity to test out how we might take things forward on an area basis. And also, I would have to say, in terms of working with community councils collectively, rather than as individual bodies, which has been a little bit different, and I'd have to say has brought its challenges. But it has worked, and hopefully we'll be able to take it on from here. So if this committee is minded to and to support the report, then our next step, and again assuming that Cabinet supports that, will be to establish the delivery group or ask community councils to ensure that they support it, and then re-establish a delivery group. We will then go back to the report and the recommendations within it, see where we go next. And I suppose the final thing I would say is it's not written in tablets of stone. If there's a need to change some elements because things are changing, then the delivery group will have to look at that and see where that might be needed. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I hope that's a reasonable introduction to the report, and now we'll take questions as members wish.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Roger. I think this is a really exciting piece of work, if I'm honest. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how successful it's going to be, because I think it could be used on future projects in other areas where we've got small communities connected. I'll go to Councillor Brown first.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, it was a very interesting report to read, and to be honest, I had to skim through it because obviously it's quite long. I just wondered how long did it actually take to do the work, because you mentioned about meetings. I mean, my particular interest is in my ward, I've obviously got villages that don't currently have a community plan, and just wondered about things like the funding for it, because obviously community councils set precepts in advance, and there may be limited funding available for this type of project, and it also obviously depends upon the community council views themselves as to whether or not they think it's something that's worthwhile. So I wondered if you could talk about the funding, and in some senses the pros and cons of having one of these, and I wondered how much it linked into the revised local development plan, and what impact it had on that particular thing. So it's really some guidance as to, I noticed that ARAP was commissioned, but obviously there would have to be some funding available to do that. So, and it's a question, that these are the sort of questions that other villagers will be interested to know, because they really need to know the pros and cons of this type of project. But it certainly is very interesting, and I think obviously the Wye Valley area is beautiful, and an area of natural beauty, which is part of the tourism offer. I was interested about the active travel side, because at the moment the funding tends to be centred on town centres as opposed to villages, and I represent villages that are very close to Chepstow town centre, but there doesn't seem to be any consideration whatsoever about active travel in terms of walking and cycling and safe routes to do so, linking up villages with towns, and I think really that's the next stage that we should actually be looking at. So I hope there's quite a mixture of questions there. I'm afraid I tend to think of quite a lot of things at the same time, but I hope you got the gist of that. First of all, how long is it? How long does it take? Is it too late for villagers to get involved in this? What are the costs, and what are the pros and cons, and how does this link to the revised local development plan? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Roger, would you like to come back in there?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. The Wye Valley study was seen as an opportunity. It was an opportunity to bring those community councils together, and they took that. So in some ways it's looked upon as a test bed, and it also had the added benefit of lying within the Wye Valley AONB, so it had a physical boundary to it within Monmouthshire. That helped, I think, in terms of taking it forward, because we also had then representation from Wye Valley AONB, and they have helped significantly with the funding. The cost of the project, the study, from memory, I think with all the works and the consultation, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a minute, it came to 49,000. That doesn't mean to say that other reports would need to be that costly. It was the extent of it, and to some degree the uniqueness of it. It was different in how we'd gone about things before. So that was that funding there. The community councils who were involved have raised their precepts to raise funding to contribute towards, in this instance, the signage, the new signage which is going in. So we've actively been working with them, and they've actively been taking that on board in terms of creating precept to contribute towards the project. And by bringing them together, they acted together. And I think that helped with them all being seen to be working together towards a common goal. I'd be unreal to say that everybody supported every element of the report, and I think you talk about pros and cons, and I think that could be part of it. One of the weaknesses around this is if one of the community councillors says, I don't like it anymore, I don't want to play a part in this. And then we will have to work out how we unravel that element of it. There's no sign of that at the moment, and we've been through lots of meetings with them. I went when the report was put together. I went to at least some of the community council meetings to talk about it. So there's no talk of them withdrawing from it. But in the back of my mind, being honest with you, I see it as a risk that if one or two walk away, then how do we manage it from there on in? Some of the elements will still work, and we may have to work. We could probably still work with individuals rather than as a group. But there's something to be said about getting them to operate collectively and offering each other mutual support through that exercise. So, in some ways, bringing all together was a benefit, and we could then look to be acting consistently. The signage issue, if we hadn't brought them all together, and this might seem a little bit a small issue, but quite frankly, it's something which people will see. As they enter Llandogo now, they will see a sign, and when they enter Tintern, they'll see a sign which is along the same theme. They'll be emphatising the fact that actually you're in the Wye Valley OMB. And when you get to Trellick, you will see a similar sort of sign, and when you get to Catbrook, you'll see a similar sort of sign. The background to it, I ain't going to go into too much detail about what these signs look like, but it's taken a lot of work to get them where they are. In the background, you can see features which relate to the village. But they've all agreed to come along with this idea. So we're creating an identity for the Wye Valley AOMB, as well as the individual villages within that. So that I think that's one of the pros coming out of it. We've been able to act collectively in terms of bringing forward the villages for the speed management issues. So was each individual village is done individually, we've at least worked with them all as a group to make this happen. And similarly with the village halls, we'll be able to work across the Wye Valley area. Now, whether other community councils wish to operate collectively, I think is something which you may wish to investigate at some point, and whether or not there are any benefits of doing so. This fell together quite well because of the Wye Valley AOMB. Let's not, I'm not going to beat around the bush. That just happened to work. But you may well have other areas, maybe North Monmouthshire or the like, which particularly you think work well collectively, or could work well collectively on a particular subject, and by working together may be a stronger group in terms of trying to deliver on something. I'd also say that, in my opinion, having worked with community councils and over many years, I would suggest it brings some more confidence to them to be able to be more proactive within their communities, similar to what I think the town councils have done to become much more proactive within their communities. Hopefully, the community councils would come along in that direction as well. So I'm pushing forward now and perhaps going outside the report a little bit, but we're trying to create a culture here where the community councils, town councils are proactive and working with the county council rather than as individuals. Perhaps I'm making myself totally clear, but that's what I see one of the benefits of it. I used the term active travel, probably shouldn't have. And what I meant was about pedestrians and cyclists, because you are quite right, active travel funding at the moment is predicated towards towns and the individual network maps. But again, from a personal point of view, I think what point you made about joining the villages to the towns is an important point. If ultimately we're going to create a much better network for people to use their bikes, or e-bikes if you like nowadays, then that's something which needs to be done as well. But that is probably something which needs to be raised in a different place at a different time about how that works in terms of active travel. But you are quite right. At the moment, the funding is predicated towards going into certain towns and around their individual network maps. So it's sort of shorthand active travel. I probably should have said pedestrians and cycling, but it's part of it. How long did it take? We kicked off one cold and wet November evening. I think it was November, October.
October.
Was it? October, was it?
October, it's in the report.
All right, thank you. 1 October in the Anchor in Tinton, when we brought people together to say, and we put together an agenda and we sought support from the community councils. It went from there. We then went to Catbrook, where we wrote the terms of reference, and we've worked our way around the various villages at different meetings, but that's where it started. It stalled a bit with the pandemic. The consultation, probably a debate again for another day, but the consultation was done predominantly online. Some stakeholder stuff was done. How did we do that? Some of it was done in Teams meetings, but the broader general public consultation was done online. And we've used it before, but I think there's a piece of work to be done around the future of consultation more generally within the authority and how that's done. There were a lot of people looked at this study, and I would argue that possibly people who were otherwise might not have if in a traditional consultation event. But you need to have both, I think, and there's a piece of work to be done around that. But yes, that's the time. The report was finally submitted to us or to the steering group in March of this year. So there was some delay in it, but there'd been a lot of consultation around a lot of different subjects on the way through to come up with that report as is. But I would say there's still a lot of work to do. Some of it's aspirational, but it sets a trend, it sets an idea, sets a direction for that delivery group to work with.
Thank you, Roger. Mark, did you want to come in there?
Yeah, please, Chair, if you don't mind. Councillor Brown mentioned a query about how it sits with things like the replacement local development plan. I guess the short answer is it doesn't. This is about, and the drivers behind this are about sort of placemaking and creating a shared identity for the villages within the area of outstanding natural beauty. So the key drivers were around that, around shaping tourism and making sure that works well for the communities, or picking out what their sort of unique points are. And also a lot of drivers around highway safety. So probably the only main bit in there that's really relevant to a local development plan was a suggestion around the need for affordable housing in those villages and how that's delivered. Otherwise, it's not really a land use planning document at all. It's a different document. I think probably the key thing that links this and the next report and the question that Councillor Brown raised about active travel is around the extent of funding and resource to support all of these ambitions. It's probably fair to say ambition is far greater than resource or money. And I think we just need to be mindful of that. So in terms of delivering the ambitions in this, it's going to have to be a collective effort by all of the parties involved. And some of it, as Roger alluded to, is ambitious, and there aren't sort of concrete ways of delivering it at the moment. Other bits, we've got an easy win with the signage, and requests around 20-mile-an-hour zones are in the pipeline. But some of the other bits will be a bit of a longer game and require some real head scratching about how they get delivered. Likewise with the active travel elements that Councillor Brown mentioned and Roger answered, completely understand the rationale and the desire for those routes, but it's a case of managing the projects we already have in the pipeline and focusing the funding where we best can. But I would just mention to finish, there is a member workshop or member seminar on the 8th of July about active travel, which will be a good opportunity to ask those questions and understand what the rationale is and the wider context of those projects.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Next we have Councillor Callard.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Roger, for presenting that report. My question was regarding supporting local economies, shared working spaces, which I think is really key to try and allow people to work where they live. One of the problems in these villages is the lack of connectivity in terms of mobile phone signal, decent broadband connections. I didn't see it, but was any of that covered in the report? And also, secondly, I wondered, in your opinion, do you think this report represented good value for money? And would you use Arup for something similar in future rather than another consultant? Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. I believe the issue of connectivity and high-speed connectivity on the internet is referred to in the report. I'm not sure if it's got any particular answers to it, but that's possibly something which I could ask for a briefing note for members on. I'm not up to speed with where we are in terms of improving internet links out into the rural communities, although I believe there are projects underway to do so. So Councillor Callard's happy with that. I'll ask somebody to provide a note with what's going on. In terms of value for money, really good question. It went out to tender, so it went through a tender process. Would we do it this way again? Possibly, but you go through a tender process. We're not wedded. We have done a lot of work with Arup over the last few years. We're not wedded to them, and there are various other projects being done by other organisations and by local consultants as well. So it's not that there's any particular allegiance to that company, but we have done quite a few studies with them in recent years. Value for money, I keep coming back to the same thing. It included the development of online consultation event, and that meant putting together a virtual room with virtual posters in it and all of the background to being able to for people to be able to respond to that and pick information from it. That was part of that cost. It may be that in the future, given the experience we've had, we might try and do some more works in-house or with a more local consultant, but each case to its own, based upon tests at that time about tendering. You tender for a larger contract such as that. Sometimes you might extend a contract because it makes sense to do so, and that's allowed for within our contract procedure rules. But I know I'm waffling and wandering around it because it's a difficult one to answer. Using large consultancy companies is never going to be cheap, but it did go through a tender exercise. That being said, we've had very good support from local consultants as well. So yeah.
Lovely. Thank you, Roger. Councillor Chandler.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Roger. I mean, I do think it's an impressive report, and there's a lot of things in there that I think can be quite useful when we're looking at some of the other parts of the county as well. I'm thinking some of the issues that I've looked at in my ward, there are some answers or at least some pointers in that report that I could sort of cherry pick from. But as ever, funding is an issue. So one of my issues are, as you said, it's an aspirational report in terms of setting a direction of travel for us. And you've said that clearly we're not going to be able to get funding for all of this. So my first question really is how are we managing expectations amongst the communities about what is going to be delivered? And alongside that, how are we, where's the sense of prioritisation within this in terms of where funding is available? What are we prioritising in terms of where we're going to try and seek that funding or channel that funding to it? Because there is so much in this report that is good. I have concerns about that. Second question, clearly, I mean, you references in the report the fact that obviously this has just addressed what is within the boundaries of Monmouthshire, but clearly it has implications across with neighbouring local authorities. I just wonder to what extent we've got any buy-in from, say, Forest of Dean District Council and amongst others in terms of them contributing to a bigger or supporting this. So that's my second question. And then the third one is a bit more specific. Yeah, it's about what I would call sustainable travel rather than necessarily active travel, because it includes public transport, but also the road safety element. So I'm glad to see that there's provision in there for gateways into the villages, because I think where we've been rolling out the 20-mile-an-hour zones, which is great, and I'm fully supportive of that. What I'm not so supportive of is the fact is we've just really been doing lines and signs, and we've not really been addressing the behavioural change aspects of the 20-mile-an-hour limits. And I think because of that, the whole project of road safety and 20-mile-an-hour zones in residential areas is getting undermined in the public view. So the whole emphasis on more the behavioural change aspect of that, whether that's village signs and beyond that, what else we can be doing to try and both win support for that, but also change those behaviours. So I suppose that's my third area that I'm particularly concerned with. There's a lot more else there as well, but those are my three ones that I'll just sort of leave with you at the moment.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I think a lot of this will rely upon the delivery group to work with the projects. There'll have to be a pragmatic approach taken to it. What can they deliver? Their priorities, to some degree, will be set by where they see funding coming available. I mentioned earlier, the fact that you have a plan may put you in a better place should opportunities come available to be able to bid for funding. So that puts us in a good place. But thereafter, it will be a case of what can we deliver, what funding can we find, and what can we deliver. There will be an element of pragmatism to this. They will go down through that list and they say, right, what can we do? Can we get funding in for this? Wye Valley AOMB has been a lucrative partner in this group because they have been able to raise funds for us. But I think that will be setting the priorities. I think will be practically through the delivery group, working with the officers, looking forward, what funding is likely to come available, what funding could the county council perhaps generate, what funding do the community councils think they may be able to generate, what might come through Wye Valley AOMB, what do we see as being the priorities within the delivery group, which we can deliver. So that's going to be part of the delivery group. I think it'd be a case of keeping the public, if we're going to keep life in this report and it doesn't become something which sits on the shelf, then we will have to keep things moving along, and we'll have to do occasional press releases out to the public about where things have been done, have been delivered, aren't being delivered, what we're looking at next, what we're seeking to achieve. So, yeah, speed limits, that's one thing coming in. You mentioned, quite rightly in my opinion, about the idea of having gateway features. It was discussed, and whether that's something which comes in the future and what they may look like. We're going to have the signage in a way that creates a feature, but it's perhaps not as sufficient as you might wish to see to actually create a change in behaviour. I'm not going to describe this particularly well, but when you come to features within the road, a change in signage, speed limits, should create a change in behaviour, and that's part of creating an improved road safety environment. So I would anticipate perhaps the delivery group would go back to that. They don't have to be hugely expensive, but they need to create a change to highlight to the motorist that something is different. So yeah, I think in terms of prioritising projects, there will have to be an element of pragmatism about that, and where do we think we can raise the funding from. In terms of buy-in from Gloucestershire and Forest Edina are well aware that this report has been prepared. Wye Valley AOMB stretches across the various authorities, and I know they will be taking this report to their committee for adoption as well. So that through the Wye Valley AOMB, which gives us an into the other authorities so as they can see, well, what's happened in Monmouthshire, what's been done different in Monmouthshire, and can they then expand that out. which, you know, practically to me, it was something which intrigued me a little bit, because Redbrook, part of the Wye Valley, is in Gloucestershire. It's not in Monmouthshire. So what do we do with the signage there? It would be lovely to get the same signage into Gloucestershire as we're going to put into Llandogo and Tynton and St Albans and the rest. There's a piece of work to be done around that, but having seen it, we may well be able to get that support, and potentially through the Wye Valley AONB, which spreads across Herefordshire, Gloucestershire, Monmouthshire, we've got a vehicle by which to take that forward. Yeah, did I cover most of the points then, I think, Councillor Chandler? I hope.
Broadly you did, but I think it's still perhaps managing expectations of the community in terms of what can be delivered. I think you maybe haven't quite addressed that fully. Okay. I think the way which we would do that is through keeping them aware through the media and through press releases on what is happening, that the fact that it exists, and giving headlines on what's coming next, just to keep it live. Due respect, if in terms of reading matter, it's not something I'm going to study every Sunday afternoon. So it's going to be around headlines. It's going to be around the big things. What's happening, which people can see visibly what is likely to change. And if that's around internet, if it's around better use of village halls, which takes us back to Councillor Callard's issues about co-working, then yeah, fine. Then I think that's the way in which we would be able to do that.
Thank you, Roger. Just on that, if we had an online consultation for this project and there were virtual rooms that people could visit, is that something that we could continue with regards to updating residents? I'm just thinking, I understand what Ian may be trying to get here and making sure we're keeping people clearly informed.
Yeah, sorry, I missed that point. Yeah, that process was used on the Chepstow Transport Study, the WellTag Stage 2. And as an example, that received 6,000 hits. It's the same process. And you also, if people will provide the information, it tells you what the demographics are of the people who are looking at that information as well. So for those that responded to that, it did show quite a mixed demographic in terms of people looking at that. Now that's Chepstow Transport Study. The same was done with Wye Valley AONB. And my recollection is there was 2,500 hits on the Wye Valley AONB consultation event. But hits doesn't mean responses. Yeah. For the Chepstow Transport Study, we practically had 330 responses. Now, on 6,000 hits, that doesn't sound like a lot. But if you took aside the fact that if in any other circumstance you'd had 330 odd responses to a consultation event, you might be cock-a-hoop with the amount of response which you'd received. So in ways, it's worked well. We received responses on Wye Valley AONB consultation. I have to say I can't remember the number. Okay. But we're also using it just out of interest at the moment on the Chepstow Transport Hub and Connectivity consultation as WellTag Stage 3. But there is a piece of work we think to be done around, and I know some members think that about being able to mix that now with face-to-face and more traditional consultation methods. At the time, it wasn't available. COVID stopped anything like that. So, as an alternative, I felt that it worked extremely well. But we now need to morph the two together, really.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Brown is next.
Yes, thank you. It fits in very well with the recent conversation that we've had, actually. I think that basically with regard to the Arab consultation, the one on the Chepstow Transport Hub, I'm a bit concerned that the consultation period is only 4 weeks, which isn't very long considering community councils meet only every month. And the second point I'd make is that when we had the training with regard to policy scrutiny training, it mentioned about making sure that you reach, the unreachable elements of the public. And, looking online at the Arabs study, it was a virtual room, but you couldn't see the whole document, basically before you went into an online consultation. So I asked them to send me the original document because I like to read things before I actually answer the questions on them. So I do think that, for example, the Chepstow Transport study isn't highlighted on the front page of the Monmouthshire County Council website. As far as I know, and you can find a page on it, but also on that page there needs to be the full consultation document as a PDF, and also possibly a Word document in which you can put in a response if you don't want to do an online sort of response going around a virtual room. I appreciate during COVID that that was the best method to use, but I think we've got to think about people who don't particularly I don't like filling in online studies until I've read the whole document, and then it just be thrown at me in a sense. So I just wondered if those little changes could actually be made, either on this study or in future, and whether the consultation period of 4 weeks could actually be extended to 6 weeks. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Madam. Ideally, it would have been 6. There was issues around the 4 weeks in terms of getting it completed within a certain period of time. So it was a compromise. The Transport Hub one, the ones we've done before have been 6 weeks, and they would normally be 6 weeks. So that we had to compromise on that one. In the Transport Hub one, the press release had the information available for people to contact the telephone number if they wanted hard copy, and it should have been on the front page of our website, so I'll check that. I'm not sure why it isn't there, so I'll see what's going on there. But I think the point you make is, well, let's go back one stage. Whether something hasn't worked quite so well with this one, I'm not sure, but it's not a criticism we had with the Wye Valley AOMB or the Stage 2, the Chepstow Transport Study Stage 2 when we did it, because we posted out a lot of hard copy documents, but the requests don't seem to be coming in this time, so I'll check what's going on with that. There's still time available, so I'll see what's going on there. We don't seem to have that same level of request this time for the hard copies, but I think looking forward, that's a piece of work which we're talking about. The online with the virtual rooms is something which appeals to some people and perhaps brings in a group of people who otherwise mightn't get involved. Speculation on my part, but I think you probably know what I mean. Traditional hard copy should still be there, and in some instances face-to-face, where people can see things and can ask questions. So I think in the future it's going to be a mix of those. We are where we are, possibly down through the COVID. That took us into this thing. We mightn't have gone here if it hadn't been for the COVID thing. But in a way, it's good that we have, because we've seen what can be achieved. But it can't be the be-all and end-all. It needs to be broader than that now.
Thank you, Roger. And Mark has just put in the group chat, Tex is on the website for requesting hard copies of the Chepstow Transport Hub document, and he's just put it in the chat for everyone. Next, we have Councillor Lucas.
Morning. Thank you, Roger. Very interesting. Some of the questions I've written down you've actually answered, so forgive me if I'm going back over old ground. It might seem a bit strange, but
oh, Jane, you've gone on mute.
There you go. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can. Thank you.
Did you hear any of it?
No.
Oh, right. Thank you. Morning, everyone. Thank you, Roger, for a very interesting report. I might be repeating some of the questions, so I apologise for that, because some of them have been answered, some of the things I've written down. But having grown up in Whitebrook, I have to ask, why is Whitebrook missing from the report? It seems very obvious to me. Lanishan, and from my understanding from the A and B, if you can see the A and B where you stand, from what, no, let's repeat that. Wherever you stand within the A and B, areas that you can see should be accounted to be within the A and B. So for that, I refer to Lanishan and Lansoy, and in that valley down from Devorden. So yeah, why has that not been included, please? Then there's the things like reopening the old railway tracks, and so as they have done in Chepstow, the tunnel from Tintern through to Chepstow. Again, there's a certain, I know you're going to say that's active travel in the well-tagged study, and I'm well aware of probably all of that, but there's long railway track along from Whitebrook to Redbrook. There's areas of which we could improve the actual track surface to improve people using it. So then the other questions I have, internet rollout. Well, I can tell you now, I'm still at home on 0.45 of a meg, and I don't live that far out in the sticks. I know I live in the sticks, but I'm still on 0.45 of a meg. So there's a real issue with internet. But bringing farmers on board, you mentioned about farming. How's that going to be done in reference to farming and flooding and the phosphates, etc.? Be very interested to learn a lot more about all of that and how we intend to actively get farmers involved and understanding what's going on to our rivers and therefore everything else towards that. And bring on from that, of course, is the tourism thing, because we want tourism, we want people to come here, we want jobs, we want communities, we want all these things, but all these things take a bigger picture. It's not just one thing, it's everything. So then you get the involvement of the people that live here, and in those areas, in particular in the outlying villages, there's a huge demographic of that area which are of older generation who do not like using the internet. So how do they get to see and learn about the consultation? Because you talk about public transport and how that could be used. And Ian mentioned about sustainable travel. Well, the reality is without the car where they live, they don't get that. Which brings on to another one thing for me, which is awareness and well-being of loneliness and able for those people to interact with others and make sure that they are using the hub of their village halls and how far that area is and to get some involvement and how's the best way of going about all of those things. Really sorry, I hope I haven't asked too many questions. And there you go. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Roger, I'll hand over to you.
Yep, thank you, Madam Chair. There was a debate about which villages should be included in the study the first time round. Whitebrook missed the cut, along with others. That doesn't mean to say that it won't be returned to. Like I say, it's a living document. It's not, and the delivery group should be continuing to revise that. Yeah, Whitebrook was mentioned at the time, but by agreement amongst the community councils and the county council, at this stage we didn't include it. It did take you into, do you include the likes of Botany Bay and Maryland and things like that? I appreciate they're different in size, but it generated that debate. So at this point, it's left out. It can come in the future for consideration. The extent of the study was the boundary of the Wye Valley AONB, and Lunsai is part of well, I don't know what it's part of now, but it was part of Lungum and Lunsai Community Council, which sat outside the Wye Valley AONB. At least that's how I'm advised. But Lunishan is part of Trellick United. The points you make about the railway track and improving the cycling facility generally, I suspect that it's something which this group may wish to refer to, but it's probably a matter which would be dealt with in other places around, well, this group might be a useful vehicle to take that forward, because the idea of extending the cycling tracks within the Wye Valley, I've heard mooted already because of the success of the one from Chepstow or from Chepstow through to Tintern, and could that be extended further? So there is conversations about that already. So that being a success, it may well be that this will be brought through that. And whether this group then chooses to take that on or acts as a group to lobby and canvass to ensure that goes forward. I think that would be something for the delivery group to work out as it goes forward. It doesn't fall within the plan as is, but like I say, it can be changed, it can be extended. Getting farmers involved, you also went into the nitrates issue and contamination of the rivers. I think that's probably outside of this group at the moment. The idea was to look for pilots to try and find receptive farmers to try new methods which may work. I'm not describing it particularly well, but it may be that some would wish to try different methods whereby they're using much less fertiliser, they're using the land in a different way, they're trying different crops. The one thing I do know, if they felt there was greater profit in it down a different direction, they may well follow that. So it's a case of finding those opportunities and testing them out. You aren't going to get, I don't think you're going to get wholesale change just like that. So you're going to have to test bed it. And what would work in the Wye Valley by way of a different product for that the agriculture could invest in. And it's going to be different there to what it is on the flatlands, isn't it? It's just a different contours, it's different land, a lot more pasture, but can you use it differently in the future to make it a more viable and productive agricultural scene? But that's a case of working with individual farmers, I would suggest, and the NFU or FUW. Consultation, how do you know if it's not on the internet? It's been advertised, it has been in the press. It is on the front end of the website, but that's back to the internet, I appreciate that. But it has been advertised in the press that hard copy is available. I think it's a fair point, and we come back to the same thing which Councillor Brown has been talking about, and that is how do we consult more extensively in the future. And there is a piece of work to be done around that for sure. And the use, you talked about awareness and well-being and the use of the hub. Well, as I said, the use of the village halls as hubs, be they for co-working or for community use, and exploiting them more so than what they are at the moment is a piece of work which hopefully Wye Valley will have will have gained some grant funding to do. I know the bid's been made, and then we can, there's an officer we believe is available within the Wye Valley AONB to work with the various village halls to look at what their futures might look like. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Roger. And next is Councillor Strong.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to pick up on a couple of things that Councillor Lucas mentioned. Very sort of opportune, given the stats from the census report that came out this week. Monmouthshire has got a very ageing population. Is it 1 in 4? And a lot of those little village communities all along that sort of Wye Valley route will be of that demographics. So this report brings a lot of strands together. The issue about affordable housing, public and sustainable sort of transport. How do you get between those villages? How do we ensure that the people that will be needed to assist older people to live a quality of life within those communities around to support them, and also the whole infrastructure with sort of digital divide and tourism. So really welcome the report, really interesting ideas within it, but for me it raises a whole load of extra questions really, and how you're going to kind of get it all together to actually support the demographics of those villages. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm thinking some of the points which you're raising, I'm not going to be answering. But what I suspect is this is feedback which perhaps you'd want to go to Cabinet, because potentially you could ask for the report, or the role of the extent of the report and the role of the group to be extended to pick up on issues such as that, and to include that within their remit. We could then take that back to the community councils, ensure they sign up to that, and then use this group as a vehicle, perhaps to do that in these rural communities. Because if I'm reading you right, it's the fact that they are rural communities as opposed to a collective area, that maybe this is an opportunity to use the group in a way which actually wasn't first intended to do, but maybe it's a strong point for the group to take forward. Equally, it's not something which relies upon huge capital funding, I would suggest, and maybe that is something which, as members, you would wish to include in feedback to the Cabinet, and then we could take that back to the delivery group to extend the role of the report, or the remit of the group. Sorry, that's what I was looking for.
Is that what we want to do as a committee? Do we want to recommend that to Cabinet? What's everyone's views?
Can I comment?
Yeah.
I think it's relevant as well. So a really interesting report, thank you, and a really interesting discussion. And it's yes, I'd echo other members' comments that it sort of has so much connections with other things. The huge elephant in the room, in a way, or the big thing we're not talking about because it's not in the scope of the people involved, I think, is the fact that this area of outstanding natural beauty has a heavily polluted river running through it. But I welcomed and that will have an impact on the environment, on the health of people around it, but also, of course, on tourism and other things that this report covers. I am aware, so we know that the Cabinet member with responsibility for the environment is already in contact with our neighbouring councils, like Herefordshire, and specifically due to concerns about the state of the river and the need to work collectively. And I'm not sure. I think my comment is that I think they should go to Cabinet, but with the extra request that it's knitted in with the work that's already being started up in Cabinet on the rivers.
Okay, thank you.
I'm aware, Madam Chairman, that there are conversations going on with Cabinet members around the impact of the contamination of the rivers, and it's so much more widespread than. It's of interest to this group. I think it's more widespread than just within the role of this group. but obviously it does affect what's going on here. But in another place, I would agree with you wholly that is a massive, massive issue for the
Sorry, just to come back very quickly, it's not a criticism of the report. I think it's a request that the two are knitted together, where they can be. One should inform the other.
Okay, there is a report, is there not, Hazel, for September that Hazel is bringing to Cabinet with Rivers and Oceans, I saw on the Forward Work programme?
I'm not sure, Chair, but we can check on that.
Yeah, if we could, and make sure that both are aware. Okay, are there any further questions for Roger? No? Okay, so just quickly to sum up, Councillor Brown asked how long did the work take, and the costs and the funding, pros and cons, and how does it link in with the RLDP, and was interested on the active travel as it's based around villages. It was 3 years, but it was delayed because of COVID. It was a test bed. There are physical boundaries that help take it forward with AONB. It costs 49,000, and community councils have raised presets to contribute towards the project. Risk that one or two of the stakeholders could walk away. However, there's no feeling of that at the moment. And it's clearly shown that partnership working has had its benefits on things like signage. It isn't linked to active travel. It was wrong terminology probably used. And there was a briefing note going out on the lack of connectivity. Sorry, that was Councillor Callard's comment. He wanted to ask questions regards the lack of connectivity on mobile phones and broadband, and there will be a briefing note supplied. And he asked, was it good for value for money? And it did go through a tender process, and we have worked with AREP historically, and it included the online consultation with a virtual room, but we may look at doing things in-house going forward, but there is no complaints on that, I don't believe. Councillor Chandler sort of agreed with my first comment that I said, it would be interesting to see how we could use this going forward in other areas around the county. He obviously stated that funding was an issue. It's a very aspirational report. So how are we going to manage expectations? We will rely on the delivery group creating the priorities and having a pragmatic approach and regular press releases. But obviously we've discussed consultation with the public quite extensively this morning. Cross-boundary working, we've obviously raised that as an issue or a way forward, but the area of outstanding natural beauty, we're going to use that as a vehicle. Councillor Lucas asked why Whitebrook is missing from the report, and there was a debate about the villages, of what villages should be included, but this doesn't mean they can't be added later on. It is a live document. The reopening of the railway tracks, Whitebrook to Redbrook, conversations are already going on because of the success from Tintern to Chepstow, that railway track. Again, Councillor Lucas raised complaints regarding the connectivity issue, which will receive a briefing note. And how are we going to bring get farmers involved? And Roger advised that pilots were being trialled to find farmers who are willing to use different methods. And again, it was back to the consultation. A whole demographic cannot access the online consultation. So we need to look how we're going to consult more extensively. And Councillor Lucas also raised a point about halls being used to improve well-being, and the use of village halls is a piece of work and we are working on, and how they can be better utilised. Councillor Strong raised a point about Monmouthshire has an ageing population, and these villages will incorporate this demographic. And maybe it's something we feed back to Cabinet, and this group looks at more extensive work on how we can best provide for those villages. And Councillor McConnell requested that this group feed into the group that will be doing the piece on rivers and oceans. So if there's anything further, I think we'll move on now. Thank you ever so much, Roger, for coming along. Are you going to stay for the meeting?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you, members, for the feedback.
Thank you ever so much for the report. It was very very extensive. So yeah, I think we all enjoyed reading that. Next, I'll move on to item 8, pre-decision scrutiny of the regeneration funding and delivery plan 22-25. I assume you're going to be presenting this, Mark? I'll hand over to you then.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'll cover the headlines, and if Dan needs to come in with any detail, I'll invite him in, or it might be more about answering members' questions.
Okay,
so
lovely.
Essentially, to set up the context of the report, it's looking at funding and activity priorities for regeneration activity over the coming 3 years, with a sort of a goal of going to Cabinet at the end of July, seeking their agreement to those priorities in terms of one step, so that we can then put in bids for Welsh Government funding, and have a framework to do that. So I guess there's a bit of context. There's 2 main sources of funding really for regeneration activity. There's levelling up funding, which members will be familiar with, and there's details in paragraph 3.5.4 of the 3 bids that are being submitted. There's 2 bids in a regeneration context and 1 around transport, and they have to be submitted next week. And then the other main source of funding is around the Welsh Government's Transforming Towns funding, and that's divided into 2 categories. There's strategic projects, which are over 250 grand, and placemaking grants, which are for things that are less than £250,000. There's other sources of funding available that we can sometimes link in with this. So things like active travel funding can be used, or safer routes in communities to match. But I think pulling on a point that the Councillor Brown mentioned earlier, all of this focus is very much, all of the funding is very much focused on towns, especially the Welsh Government funding, which is explicitly for towns and town centre activity. So what we are looking to take to Cabinet and seeking your scrutiny on are 3 aspects really, excuse me. One is proposal to seek funding for what we've referred to as placemaking plans. Although from a meeting yesterday where we're working with Chepstow Town Council, it's clear that name's causing some confusion, where you have a separate sort of community-led place plan, which is more along the lines of both a community plan and a land use planning type document, similar to Councillor Brown's references earlier. Different to a placemaking plan, which is more an overarching master plan for the town, and a bit more sort of regeneration and placemaking focused in a broader context. So at the moment, there are those kind of plans already in place for Caldecott and Usk, and the Wye Valley Villages project, albeit a rural focus, has just been discussed. We got funding last financial year to work with Chepstow Town Council on a plan for that town. And that's now going to be known as the Transforming Chepstow Master Plan, following yesterday's meeting. And the proposal in the report that'll be going to Cabinet is that we seek funding to provide these kind of master plans for Monmouth, Mega and Abergavenny, in that order of activity and preference going forwards. In terms of the funding stream for sort of capital works, there's a £44 million allocation in South East Wales for transforming towns, but the Welsh Government's agreed they'll actually over allocate the funding on the basis some projects don't have full spend or don't come forward. So the pot we can bid into is £57 million, and it will be about bids rather than the Monmouthshire allocation. So we're looking at around about £5 to £6 million on a sort of a Monmouthshire share basis. You can then see from the tables further on in the report, as I mentioned earlier, our aspirations and activities that come up far exceeds that budget. So in terms of strategic projects, there's a table at paragraph 3.7.1, which looks at some of those projects that have been identified. They're not all costed, but the ones that are comes to just shy of £25 million, so well in excess of the funding that's available. But projects that are probably be broadly familiar to you and you might be wanting to support. In terms of Cabinet, we're not seeking a decision on those priorities for now. We're suggesting that bit's paused until we have a decision on LUF funding, and then we'll know how to allocate the rest of the budgets. And then in terms of placemaking, Appendix B sets out a list of projects that we'd like to support, and we'll be asking Cabinet to agree those. So that's about £2.1 million worth of funding, plus 30% match funding from Monmouthshire Council. And we'll be looking to get work on those started. So the reason we're seeking sort of that split decision is if we're successful on LUF, that very much influences how much money is available or not available for other projects. But if we leave everything until sort of the autumn when we have that decision, we'll have lost half of this year and not be able to progress on some really important projects that have already cropped up. So we want a decision on the smaller bits from Cabinet now, and wait until the autumn for the LUF strategic project side of things, and then we can prioritise those accordingly. So I think that's the essence of the report, Chair. Dan, I don't know if there's any detail you wanted to pick up on now, or if you're happy to go for questions.
Thanks, Mark. I'm happy to just respond to questions. There were just a couple of specific things that I thought it might be worth flagging up before we move on to that. One is around the placemaking plans, or the documents formerly known as placemaking plans, and the rationale for those, for putting those in place. So there's what they're intended to do is working with stakeholders, working with communities to make sure that we have a good understanding of what a shared understanding of what the challenges and opportunities for a particular place are, and then a shared view, a vision, if you like, a kind of direction of travel, so that we know what we're aiming for. And then the documents generally try to kind of start thinking about how we bring that about, what are the interventions, typically in terms of projects, what are the things that we need to do in a particular place to achieve that vision, to bring those objectives about. And it also, that means that it gives us a kind of framework to assess project ideas, so that we can look at a particular project and say, well, to what extent does this help us achieve the objectives that we've collectively agreed? To what extent does this help us tackle the problems or make the most of the opportunities that we've collectively identified? So that's a kind of useful thing in itself, so that we understand that these aren't just a kind of collection of projects that might be good on their own terms, but that we're confident that they add up to cumulatively to something more than that. But then the second thing, and this is picked up in the report, is about the kind of the practical use of those documents in helping secure funding. So in general terms, in grant bids and so on, it's useful to be able to show that a particular project sits within a strategic context, so that it's, again, not just a project by itself, but there's a kind of framework around it. But specifically for the Welsh Government's Transforming Towns funding as of this year, and for their programme over the next 3 years, there's an explicit expectation that any projects that they fund through Transforming Towns will be derived from a placemaking plan, or at least that there's a placemaking plan in progress. And we can talk about what we call those things, but for now, the Welsh Government terminology of placemaking plan is a kind of useful shorthand. So that's on the placemaking plans. The other thing that I was going to say about the placemaking projects, so the Welsh Government refers to strategic projects and placemaking projects in terms of transforming towns. Generally, we can just think of those as big and small projects, so there's the really big stuff like Mono Street or, Cross Street, or Chepstow High Street, and then there's the smaller interventions, that are often, think of as kind of quick wins, and the placemaking projects are the latter. The application process has actually just opened late last week or this week, for that funding over the next 3 years, and there's that schedule of projects that's listed at the in the appendix at the back of the document, which are the projects that we're going to be putting in, or that we're proposing we'll be putting in for that application. But it's quite flexible, so the information that we'll be providing about that program of projects will be relatively high level, and while we'll be committing to delivering the short-term projects, there is some flexibility over the 2 or 3 years to kind of revisit that as new priorities emerge, or particularly with the towns where we don't currently have placemaking plans. No doubt there will be stuff that comes out of those that we haven't identified so far. So there's room for manoeuvre kind of once we've got that initial agreement for funding of the projects.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Mark. The first questions are going to come from Councillor Brown.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm looking at the report, and you've got the Appendix A, and that details obviously a large sum at the end in terms of the total, and then you've got Appendix B, which says placemaking projects priority list. I'm a bit confused why the recommendation within this there are some things within Chepstow, and yet the recommendation doesn't actually mention Chepstow. And I was under the understanding that you were talking about promoting projects within Appendix B. And if you look at the recommendation, it doesn't actually include Chepstow as well. And I just wanted to ask a question about it says Chepstow shopfront enveloping, and I'm not quite sure what that means, because it is useful to have the shop fronts improved, because obviously I don't know whether there's any sort of grants for that. That's not public realm issues, that's actually just presentation of the town centre issues. And the other, obviously there are a number of vacant shops within Chepstow, as in other areas. But one of the things is that there is Herbert Lewis, which is obviously one of the main buildings that is empty at the moment, as well as Barclays. Is that there is a clock there that apparently it could be repaired, but it's about £10,000 to repair it. And I appreciate that it's a privately owned property, but it's almost symbolic from the point of view of the fact that the time has stood still in Chepstow, and Chepstow hasn't got the support it drastically needs at the moment to improve things and improve footfall and so forth for various reasons. So I wondered whether or not there was, in a sense, grants available for shop frontages and also those type of things. And I understood with regard to Herbert Lewis that there was a planning application to do work. I think it was basically going to have flats above and then basically different types of shops within it. And that seems to have stalled. I understand that there was a Section 106 thing being signed, but obviously, the quicker you can get these shops filled in a sense, and the offer that's available to people shopping in the town centre, the better. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Mark, would you like to come in there?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Councillor Brown. If I answer the bit about the recommendations and just clarify that, and then I'll pass to colleagues around the detail of the placemaking grants available. So the first part, in terms of recommendations, or our recommendations to Cabinet, will be to agree to do placemaking plans in Monmouth, Magar, and then Abergavenny. So Chepstow's not mentioned there because that was funded last year, and that work's already ongoing. So that's taken as a given that project will be continued and completed. The second recommendation is around pausing on a decision on the strategic projects until we know a decision on LUF funding in the autumn. And then the third recommendation is to endorse the list at Appendix B, which does include those projects in Chepstow. So hopefully, Councillor Brown, does that clarify what the recommendations are to Cabinet and that we're asking you to scrutinise now? Does that make sense now?
Yes, thank you. It's probably better if 2.3 says mentions Appendix B within it. I think that would help to clarify it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Do any of the other councillors have any points they want to raise on this? No.
Sorry, Chair. Do you want us to answer the sort of the more detailed questions about the grants available?
Yeah, if you
Councillor Brown?
could, because it's very complex and I think a lot of us are struggling with it.
Should I come in there? So there was a specific question about the proposal for shopfront enveloping in the placemaking projects. So in the projects that are listed at Appendix B, which is the list of projects that we are recommending will form our bid for Transforming Towns placemaking grant. That list of project. So actually, perhaps just to take a step back, Transforming Towns placemaking grant, the Welsh Government has very recently, actually published its revised framework, which sets out the types of projects that can be covered, that can be funded through Transforming Towns placemaking grant over the next 3 years. And that's actually quite a broad range of types of projects. So it in town centres, as Mark said, it's all focused on town centres, but that includes grants for properties, for commercial properties, potentially for residential development or for residential refurbishment as well. It includes grants for public realm schemes, albeit the limitations on the funding, the ceiling of £250,000 of Welsh Government funding for these projects means that we're generally in terms of placemaking grant talking about relatively small public realm projects. There's potential to fund green infrastructure projects. There's potential to fund town centre focused digital connectivity projects, and that's something that we pursued last year through Transforming Towns. And there's a number of other types of projects as well. And that's reflected in the list of projects that we've got here, which is also quite broad. So there are some, again, there are some relatively small public realm projects. There's proposals for grants to buildings, which I'll talk a bit more about in a moment, and a number of other types of projects. And as I say, there's also, an expectation, I think, both Welsh Government and among ourselves that the placemaking grant project list will evolve over during the course of its delivery over the next 3 years. The specific question about shopfront enveloping in Chepstow. So members may be aware that we've been delivering with funding from Welsh Government over the last 2 or 3 years a programme of shopfront grants in Caldicot. So we've given now 3 or 4 completed projects where we've provided grant via the Welsh Government to improve commercial buildings in Caldicot. And for those of you that know the town centre there's 2 Chinese restaurants in the town centre that have been, really transformed in terms of their appearance through that grant programme. A couple of other shops in the town centre that have benefited from that work, and we've got 2 or 3 further potential grants lined up for this year, subject to this funding being approved. The placemaking grant proposal here proposes to extend, to roll out that kind of grants approach, so grants for, generally speaking, kind of run-down commercial buildings in town centres, to Abergavenny, Monmouth and Chepstow. It's been clear over the kind of course of delivering that scheme in Caldicot that there is a need for and perhaps an appetite for similar kinds of grants in other town centres, and so we're seeking funding to do that here. The scale of funding that we're seeking is not huge. These are complex projects to deliver, and it's often, in spite of the fact that we're offering pretty generous grant, or have been offering pretty generous grant to building owners and to business owners, generating the kind of take-up is challenging. So the amounts that we're looking for are relatively low, but it would give us the flexibility to offer those sorts of grants in other town centres as well. There is not, I think, from memory, there aren't specific projects around empty properties currently listed within the placemaking grant proposals, although that's a kind of issue that's on the radar, for tackling perhaps through other mechanisms. But again, as I say, there's flexibility. So we have offered last year through Transforming Towns, we've offered grants given grants to bring empty properties back into use for kind of meanwhile use purposes, and that would be an option again. Or if there are longer term uses that bring empty properties back into use, that there are options here. And I'd be interested to know that there's a long-term empty property in Caldecott Town Centre as part of the 7043 Newport Road building, and there's a project to bring that back into use that formed part of the Levelling Up Fund proposals for 7043 Newport Road in that bid.
Okay.
So that's helpful as a kind of quick overview of where we are on the placemaking grants, but happy to answer any more questions on that.
Lovely. Are we looking to go out and ask members to report? I know we've done this exercise before on the empty properties. Are we looking to go back out to new members to advise of any properties that they have concerns on?
Not sort of explicitly, Chair. We have annual surveys done on empty retail units, on different uses in towns, and that kind of data. So we've, generally speaking, we got that, and a lot of the chambers provide us with that information regularly as well. So probably not in that sense. The one thing I would mention that we would like to do again is when we started the work with the sort of emergency COVID measures, which were trialling different things in different high streets. We held a series of meetings with the county councillors for the town council reps and the chamber reps for the businesses, and they went really well. We held those probably roughly quarterly for a good 18 months. So we'd like to resurrect those and use those as a forum to talk about things that actually came up in the previous session, around sorry, the one before that, even around the future of Mono Street, future of Chepstow High Street, those kind of things. So we'd like to set that forum up, and that would be a space where members can tell us about different things happening in the towns that they're representing, and do it that way. So rather than sort of a call out saying, come back to us with any issues you know about, I think we'd do it in that format instead.
Okay, thank you. Do members have anything else they want to raise with Mark and Daniel on here today? So are we happy to go with the recommendations? Mark's read out the recommendations. If you just have a show of hands. Lovely. Thank you ever so much, Mark and Daniel.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Next is item 9, which is petitions received, and we've got 2. So we've got the first one is, we the undersigned are opposed to the use of tarmac, asphalt and cattle grids on Castle Meadows, Abergavenny. For this one, it's not really for us to debate here, but what do we want to do with them? Let me just check my notes. So we've got 2 options. We can pass it to the cabinet member and CC the relevant chief officer for consideration, or we might think it's a full agenda item and you can add it to the forward work programme. What's members' views?
I mentioned it earlier. I mean, I definitely think the cabinet member will be interested to hear about it. I know this is already on their radar about the surface of the new paths in the meadows.
Yeah.
And as Mark said earlier, this I expect will come up through planning at some point soon. So we might be overlapping responsibilities a little bit if we brought it forward on our agenda.
Okay, so are we happy then just to refer this to cabinet and chief officer? Yeah, lovely, thank you. And the next one, I do apologise, I'm flicking between different screens here, is a Wyshem petition, which states, we the undersigned petition for the repair and maintenance of the equipment and remedial drainage of the whole site within an agreed time frame. So where is this location that they're referring to? Confirming that this water is drained from the Kimmer Major Works. Right, the grass section of the community play area at Tudor Road, Underhill, Wisham, was intended for football and other games, but is frequently unusable for at least half the year because of inadequate drainage. Monmouthshire County Council have confirmed that they are aware of this, but as water is draining from the Kimmer Major Works, need to be undertaken to rectify it. What's everyone's views on this? Do we want to refer this to Cabinet? Do we want to put this on our forward work programme? I'm happy for it to go to the Cabinet member and Chief Officer.
Councillor Bryn, is Wisham your ward?
It is, yes. It is, yes. This is a problem that's been going on for a number of years, and meaning that the football pitch has been unusable for quite some time during the successive months of the year.
Okay. Do you have any preference on this?
Whichever, having no experience, I don't know which way is the best, the most effective angle to take, really, whichever.
Okay. Councillor Brown, did you want to come in?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I was just thinking that it might be, we seem to be going along the route of referring these to Cabinet members and Chief Officers, but the petitions obviously aren't in my particular area, so I haven't got any prejudicial interest. But I think it's useful if it is referred to Chief Officers and Cabinet members, if this committee actually gets some feedback on it. I appreciate that one of the applications might overlap with planning, and it may be that we'd get some sort of delayed feedback on that. But I think if we're going to scrutinise items, and if petitions aren't going to, are going to be actioned, then I think we need to have some feedback. And it may be at a later stage that if we aren't happy with the feedback that we've got, then it might be that we'd want either an item on it, or refer it to Cabinet, or do some other thing with the petition that comes, because otherwise, these petitions can basically be answered privately by Cabinet members and Chief Officers. They aren't, the people who've signed the petition don't actually get the feedback that they deserve, I think. I think petitions sort of, if we're not careful, end up going down this black hole where we don't get proper feedback on it. And, we need to scrutinise the issues that are raised by the public. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Councillor Chandler?
Yeah, I'd like to echo what Councillor Brown said, but also maybe add a little bit to it as well. I think it's not enough for us, I think, just to refer it on to the Cabinet member. I think there is a case for us saying, we believe this has merit, but also I think we could ask for a specific response, not just a general feedback. So, for example, with the Wisham one, I think we could be asking for, actually, we want an update on what the options are, what the forward plans are for the relevant part of the council for this, in terms of when it's going to be addressed, and also how are they communicating back to the community in Wisham, as well as Councillor Brown said, making sure that we're getting a general feedback that's also going to the petition organisers and signatories.
Okay, thank you. So shall we say then we're going to refer it to Cabinet and Chief Officer, but we would like feedback and a briefing from the Cabinet member or Chief Officer on what the outcome is going to be and how they're going to put it into practice, I suppose, what work is going to be put in place to rectify the situation. Yeah, okay, lovely. Item 10, to confirm the following minutes. Now, I know lots of you wouldn't have been present, and I don't know if we got anyone who was sat on economy and development, but I need a proposer and a seconder for 10A, Economy and Development Select Committee. Hazel, are they okay to propose and second these, even though we haven't been present in this meeting?
Yes, Chair. I think at best all we can do is make sure that members are cited on them. They do need to be tabled to the meeting today, but we can actually put in the minutes that, you know, there might only have been one member who was present that was on that committee at the time, or in fact, in this instance, I don't think there's any. So we can just say that they were tabled here to this meeting, but there was nobody present who was able to second them.
Okay, lovely. So can I have a proposer and a seconder?
Happy to propose, Chair.
So Councillor Davis is going to propose. Can I have a seconder?
I'll second, Chair.
And Councillor Lucas will second. And Strong Community Select Committee on the 10th of March. I'm happy to propose those. Can I have a seconder as well?
I'll second that as well, Chair, if you wish.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Lucas. And the next meeting is Thursday, the 15th of September. Can I suggest that we had some discussion in the pre-meeting about times of meetings. I did propose 2 o'clock, but some people do have to pick up children. So can I suggest we go with 12 o'clock for that meeting? Can we do the pre-meeting at 12 and then the actual meeting start at 12:30, or would you rather?
That works for me.
Start on the hour. Okay, thank you. Hazel, is that okay?
Yes, we'll put arrangements in place, Chair.
Okay, and then the next one we'll probably look to do at 2 o'clock. But yeah, we'll go from there.
So, sorry, Chair, so what will be the timing of the next meeting, please?
The next meeting is going to be Thursday, the 15th of September, and the pre-meeting will start at 12 o'clock. And the actual meeting will start at 12:30. Okay, thank you all for attending. And I'll see you next time or another meeting. Take care all. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Chair.
Bye. Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you.